Welcome back to another episode of the Endgame Series. In case if you're new here, my name is Ujjwal. I'm having a FIDE rating of 1 into 1.4 and I've been playing chess for nearly a decade. In today's video, we are going to study one of the most famous and instructive endgames ever played. Anatoly Karpov versus Garry Kasparov. A beautiful knight versus bishop endgame. If you're serious about improving your endgame understanding, this is one of those games you simply must study. So I hope you're ready to improve your endgame, so let's begin. Okay, so Anatoly Karpov is playing with white and Garry Kasparov is playing with black. So it's a very typical endgame where white is having the knight and black is having the bishop. It's a close position, and usually in a close position knight is always stronger. And another factor here is black is having the light square bishop and all of black's pawns, or you can see the majority of pawns, is already on the light squares, which is a bad news for black, which makes dark squares very vulnerable. And let's say if I'm able to put my e3 knight to c5, attacking the pawn on a6, white is already having some plans like this, and which makes black's defense very hard. Though currently it's a drawn position, it's a game. So white just played the move b4. b4 makes very much sense, closing down the position, not allowing black to grab some space on the queen side. And after b4, black played the move g cross h4. Or you can say the Garry played the move g cross h4, which was not the best way to play. Now, this position is very famous and has been analyzed by many top players. Now, the best defense would have been, at the place of gh4, would have been to play the move bishop g6. Now, just trying to keep the position close, giving no breakthrough to white, and this could have been the best continuation for black. But black played the move g cross h4. And now, Garry obviously considered the most obvious move in this position which any player would do, which is simply g cross h4. Obviously, g cross h4 is a very natural move. You would always try to capture the pawn. And now, after g cross h4, Garry is like, okay, now white's king is going to come on f4. The knight is going to sit on f5. Though black is going to be on time to get the bishop onto f7, defending both the pawns on h5 and on d5. Though the defense is hard, but it's defendable and black can actually hold the draw. But what Garry missed was, after g cross h4, Anatoly played the move knight to g2. And this is a very strong move in this position and a very deep idea. Now after knight g2 here, what's happening here is Anatoly is simply sacrificing a pawn. After knight g2, if you are thinking of h3, which I was thinking at first, just trying to push the pawn attacking the knight, it's not really working up, as after knight f4, you can't push the pawn, king g2 is there, I'm going to chop off your pawn on h5, and now I'm just a pawn up and I'm completely winning. So h3 is not going to work. So in the game we had h cross g3, which is the best, king cross g3. So the question is, why did Anatoly even sacrifice the pawn? Now, the reason Anatoly sacrificed a pawn was to get the entry point for the king. Now you see, as there is no pawn on g3 or h4, now white is having a clean path to go to h4, get the knight to f4, capture the pawn on h5, and that's a very good position for white, and that's the perfect way to play. So after king cross g3, now black plays the move king e6. Now, if black plays a move like bishop g6, protecting the pawn on h5, white can jump with the knight attacking the bishop have to go back, and after king h4, let's say black plays a move and I can simply take the pawn on h5. And now you guys, many of the players, many of the beginners and even intermediate players must be wondering, okay, what happens in the king pawn endgame if I just take off the knight? Now this is a completely winning position for white. Why? Because white's king is much active compared to the black king. Now for example, king f7 not allowing white to play the move king g6. White is going to play king h6, keep moving forward. Now you can't play the move like f5 because I can go king g5. And after king e6, I'm having f4 where I win the pawn on f5. So you have to move the king. And now I get the g6 square. You have to play the move king e6. That's the only move to protect the pawn. And now simply f4. And now we have king e7. You can't play f5 because I simply have king g5. You have to move the king. I can capture the pawn. You have to move the king, and after f5, You have to move the king. I can capture the pawn on f6 and white is totally winning. So that's why bishop g6 is not going to work up. Black played the move, or Garry played the move king e6, sacrificing the pawn back. We have knight f4 check, king f5, trying to just sacrifice the pawn back and try to just activate the king, which makes so much sense practically. Knight cross h5, and now we have the move king e6 going back. Of course, because black is not really having any other play. And the main reason why black went back with the king to e6 was, now white's idea is to play the move knight g7 check. The king has to move, and then the g7 knight is going to go on e8, followed by on c7, and simply take the pawn on a6. And that's a very deep idea for white, and white is completely winning in that position. So that's why king e6 is the main move, so that after knight g7, I can simply stop it with maybe of king f7 or even king e7. We have to move knight f4 check by Anatoly Karpov, attacking the king on e6. You have to go to king d6 and now king g4. So you see now Anatoly is finally deciding to advance his king. You see the idea was worth it, sacrificing the pawn, and now the king is ready to march into the black's camp, and white is totally winning. Now black played bishop c2, king goes to h5, bishop goes to d1, attacking the pawn on f3, and now many players would like to protect the pawn back, but simply king g6 is one of the best approach to play. And now we have to move king e7. Now if black goes for capturing the pawn on f3, that would be a big blunder, because white can simply chop off the pawn on f6. Now many players can argue, is this even winning for white? Because it looks like both the sides are having only 3 pawns, both the sides are having a minor piece. How could this even be winning? This is a win because it's very hard to play with the black pieces, and both the pawns on d5 and a6 are extremely soft pawns. Just to show you guys how is this winning for white here is, after king cross f6, let's say black plays a waiting move like knight bishop e4. Now first my idea is to simply get the knight to f5 to give you a check. So first of all, I'll just maneuver the pieces back and forth and just give you a check. And now, for example, just to show you, if you're a complete beginner, what happens if you go into the king pawn endgame, that would be complete losing because you have to move the king. Now simply king e5, attacking the pawn, you have to defend it. King e6, now you move the king, I capture the pawn, and king pawn endgame is lost for black as I'm already having a passed pawn. So that's not going to work, so black plays the move, so like black have to play a move like king d7, just moving the king. Now I get the square on e5 for my king, and now this is winning. Let's say black keeps making a waiting move with bishop f3, knight e3, attacking the pawn. You have to come back with the king to protect the pawn on d5. Now king goes to e6. You see the king moved, and now I get the move of king e6. Now the king e6 is a very critical move because let's say black keeps making a waiting move. I want to give a check. The king have to go, and now I can take the pawn finally, and that's the whole idea. That's the whole idea. I can give a check, I can capture the pawn, and that's completely winning. And king e6 was a very critical move in this position, because if I try to do the same thing, for example, if I just try to go like with knight f5, now let's say black is having this king d7, and I'm not really having this knight e7 move in. So that's the reason first playing king e6 is very important, and then going with the same variation, white can capture the pawn, and that's completely winning. So that's what's happening if black goes for capturing the pawn on f3. Now, Garry played a very strong move, which is king e7, which makes so much sense. And it looks like black is simply giving up the pawn on d5. Now, any player would simply go for capturing the pawn, but that's a bad move, which makes the position equal now. It looks like, what's wrong with even capturing the pawn? But the main problem here is, we have the move king to e6. Now, this is exactly what happened in the game. So, instead, I'm going to show you the best way to continue the position, which is knight h5. Now, knight h5 is the best way. Now, capturing the pawn won't be a good way, because after knight h5, let's say black captures the pawn on f3, white captures the pawn on f6. And now what's happening here is, this is completely winning. Let's say black gives a check, I move the king. Now, first of all, capturing the bishop would be losing because it's not going to work. Black is going to make the queen. So white plays king g5, bishop goes back, now knight g4. Now, once again, capturing the pawn on d5 would be a big blunder, because after king to d6, the knight goes back, bishop goes back, king over here. Basically, then the king on d6 is already on a very nice square, and black just can keep waiting, and white can't really make any progress. Let's say white tries to push the pawn, try to get the king to d4. Black is on time to get the king to e5, and now black can even go for capturing the pawn on d5 with maybe bishop g6, bishop f7, and simply capture the pawn, and that's a draw. So that's why capturing the pawn would be a big blunder. So instead, a better move is simply knight g4. Just keep waiting. Bishop f1, knight to e5, bishop over here, king, trying to just make progress with the king. We have first put the knight on a best square. Now we are going to make progress with the king. The king move, knight goes to c6. First we are going to put the knight on a5 to c5. The king goes over here. Now we are slowly going to advance the king. Bishop have to wait. Knight c5 attacking the pawn. Bishop have to go back, and finally white can just keep making a waiting move like king f7. Now you see, bishop is having no move because the bishop moves, the pawn falls. So black have to make a waiting move, and I get this move king e7. Slowly I can give a check, get the king, knight to c5 once again. You have to once again move the king because the bishop is having no square available. You move the king e5, you have to move the king, and a knight goes to e6. You can't capture the knight because that would be a losing pawn in game. You have to wait, and after knight f4, white captures the pawn, and that's a win. So basically both the sides have to maneuver the pieces a bit, not black, but white is the one who has to maneuver the pieces a bit, and then the position is completely winning. And that's why knight h5 is a completely winning position. And now discussing about knight cross d5, why is this a bad move? Because after knight cross d5, it allows black to play the move like king to e6. And this kind of allows black, like as there is no pawn on d5, now black gets an entry point with d5 to get on the queen side. And that's the main point. We have king e6. It was a check. And now, first of all, king e6 is an insane and a very strong move in the position. Knight c7 check, and now we have the move king to d7, which was a bad move by Garry. Now, a better move would have been to play the move king d6, because eventually in the end of the day, it saves a tempo. For example, in this position, if king d7 was happening in the game, so first talking about king d6, after king d6, black sacrifices another pawn, black takes a pawn, white takes a pawn, so it looks like white is a 2 pawn up, so of course this should be winning for white. But this is a draw because black is having no play. Let's say bishop c6, the king move. Now I try to play the move king d5. Now for example, if I just try to go direct king d5, that would be a bad idea because knight c7 check, and maybe white can push the pawn. Like for example, if you just try to move the king, now d5 is completely winning, and that's winning. You can't even take because pawn endgame is just winning for me. So yeah, so that's why first bishop c6, the king move, and now king d5. And you see, we basically save the move. The king basically saved the move. If the king would have been on d7, the king would have been on d6 right now, and that allowed white to play the move king f4. And after king d5, the king would have been on e3. I'm going to show you in the future now. So knight c5, king takes the pawn, and this is just a draw. The bishop and pawn can simply hold 2 pawns, and that's a draw. So going back, in the game we had king d7. White took the pawn, takes, king over here, king over here, king over here. First attacking the bishop move, and now king e3. You see, white is on time to defend the pawn, and this is simply pressing for white. Now king c4, knight goes to c5, covering the b3 square. We have bishop to c6, knight goes to d3, bishop to g2, both the sides are sort of maneuvering the pieces, and now we have king c3. Now remember, king b3 looks a very tempting move in the position, though it's a big blunder, because after king b3, it allows white to play king d2, which is a very strong idea, and you must always remember this. Sacrificing a pawn, and after king c3, the king is doomed on the queen side, and now white can just keep on pushing this pawn, just get the knight to c3, and keep pushing the pawn. Black have to give up the bishop for the pawn, and then knight can simply capture the pawn and make a queen and win the game. So king c3, a very good move. Knight over here, king over here, knight over here, and now bishop b7, which was a blunder in the position. Now a better move was bishop h1, just keep waiting, and after knight over here, king over here, there is no progress to make. White have to sack the pawn, and even this is a draw. You can't make any progress as the c4 square is already covered up, and eventually this is a draw. So going back, bishop b7 was played, which allowed white to play the move knight to f5. Though bishop h1 was the only move in the position, which was extremely hard to find. So yeah, bishop b7 was played, knight over here, the bishop goes back to g2. Now, for example, a better try would have been king c3. Just to analyze the position a bit more, after king c3, the best continuation for white to win the game is to play the move knight d6, attacking the bishop and the pawn. The bishop have to move to c6, and now knight to c8. And what's the idea? Let's say after bishop d7, let's say after king b3, just first trying to go for capturing the pawn. White can first play the move knight a7, attacking the bishop and the pawn. The bishop have to move, and now d5. White gets the opportunity of d5. Basically, the whole idea of knight a7 is to move the bishop and to get the d5 in. And black takes the pawn, and we use this opportunity to put the knight on c6, first protecting the pawn. And now the idea is to simply get the king, and that's completely winning. You can't even you can't even take the knight because I can make the queen. You get the king, I can get the king, and that's completely winning. So that's why, let's say bishop d7 at the place of playing king b3. I can play knight b6, the bishop move, and I can once again keep on pushing the pawn. Like have to go for capturing the pawn on a3, but once again I get this king in after d5, and that's completely winning for white. So very hard to find. We have bishop g2. It's a check, the king move, and white simply took the pawn on b5. King a4, the knight moves, and after knight to d6, Garry Kasparov decides to resign the game. Why? Because if black takes the pawn on a3, black can simply keep on pushing. Now the pawn is ahead of the king. You have to give up the bishop for the pawn, for example, over here, 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 here. You have to give up the bishop for the pawn, and this is just winning for white. So that's why after knight d6 on the move number, I don't know the exact move number, but yeah, that's Garry Kasparov resigned the game and Anatoly Karpov won the game. So a very instructive knight versus bishop endgame that every player must know. Like just giving you a quick recap. Now, any player must be wondering, like first capture on h4 and then we're going to start to think. But it's not always the best to take, because once you take, the king is not really getting any entry point. So what Anatoly did was he sacked the pawn. He sacked the pawn just to open up the king, just to get the path for the king. And now the king is having the path. So eventually advanced his king further. He got his own chances. The defense was extremely hard for black. Basically, you see, even this position is a draw. Like, it's a draw, but it's very hard to draw. That's the whole point. If white would have took the pawn on h4, it's much easier to draw for black, as white king is not really getting any entry point. If you put the king on f4, I'm going to put the king on e6, not allowing you to play the move king f5, and even my bishop is covering the squares. If you put the knight on f4 anytime soon, I'm simply going to put the bishop on f7 by playing the move bishop g6, bishop f7, protecting both the pawns. So you see, it's not so easy for white to win. It's very hard to win. So it's objectively a draw. But what Anatoly did was he sacked the pawn just to make the path open for the king, and it's even harder for black to defend. Though it's defendable, but very hard, even for engines. So yeah, that's the reason Anatoly simply outplayed Garry Kasparov in the endgame, and he once again showed why this example once again shows why knight is stronger than the bishop in a block endgame. When the position is blocked up, the knight is always stronger than the bishop. So whenever you are having the knight against the bishop, always try to find paths, always try to find ways to somehow get your king at once and try to outplay your opponent. So I hope this endgame was very educational. If it was, make sure to like, share, and smash that subscribe button. I'm going to see you soon in the next upcoming videos. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.